Hey everyone, welcome to Amanda's Book Corner. I'm Amanda, and this is my little bit late wrap-up for all the books I read in April. Well, actually, it's not all the books I read in April, it's 6 out of the 10 that I actually ended up reading throughout the month. The other 4 are in a different video, which I'll link to right here, which was all the books I read for my April reading challenge, which was to read books set in Paris. So all my Paris books I read are in that video, but all the other books I read this month are in this one here. The first book I finished in April is called By the Book by Jasmine Guillory. It feels a little bit like cheating to include this one because I actually read most of it in March and I just happened to finish it on April 1st. But no matter, it counts because I did finish it in April. This is the second book in the Meant to Be series by Disney. The first book is written by Julie Murphy called If the Shoe Fits, which is a retelling of Cinderella. This book by Jasmine Guillory is a retelling of Beauty and the Beast. Beauty and the Beast was one of my 3 favorite Disney movies growing up, the other 2 being The Lion King and Aladdin. So I really love Beauty and the Beast and I was really excited to read this retelling of it. This retelling is set in the world of publishing and it stars 2 black characters and is set primarily in California instead of France. The book starts off with Isabel, or Izzy, who works at a publishing house called Tale as Old as Time. Yep, you get that reference right there. She's been tasked with getting a reclusive celebrity to finally submit his memoir manuscript. Now, this guy has not responded to her emails in over a year, and she's not sure that she can get this guy to actually cooperate. She ends up spending some time in his house, and through a series of interesting events, she ends up staying more time than she expected to, working with him to finally get his writing going and make him feel confident in what he's saying and actually be able to communicate the things that he's afraid to talk about in his memoir. In addition to working together on his memoir, it's also a little bit of a romance, kind of a grumpy sunshine romance. And I like seeing how these 2 go from being kind of enemies to starting to develop an understanding with each other and eventually really helping each other in a lot of ways, both with their career and with writing and with emotional intimacy as well. So one of my favorite things about this book really is how many subtle references there are to Beauty and the Beast. There's so many different examples that I thought were so fun. Of course, our publishing house is called A Tale as Old as Time, which of course is a reference to the song. I also like that his Wi-Fi password, for example, is Lumiere, with a 1 instead of an I, so that's hilarious. There's also references to Izzy kind of jokingly thinking that her furniture is talking to her and wondering how the dishes magically wash themselves. Hint, it's because he hasn't made. And there's just so many different little references, some bigger, some smaller, that really remind you of the Disney movie. I also really like the exploration of deeper topics, including grief and dealing with depression, and really learning to communicate things that are hard for you to communicate about. It's about reconnecting with someone that you've kind of become estranged from. It's about really working on understanding yourself and feeling free to express yourself openly. And I really do value the discussions they have about therapy and about burnout and other topics surrounding mental health. This is a cute and clean romance. All the scenes are fade to black, but I thought it was really sweetly done and it really felt like a Disney version of a novel, but for adults. There are also a lot of discussions of food though, so be forewarned that this book might make you a little bit hungry. So I thought this book was really sweet and I gave it 4 stars. The second book I read is Violet Bent Backwards Over the Grass by Lana Del Rey. This is a poetry collection and I did choose to read this one because April is also poetry month and so I was trying to squeeze into more poetry. I read a poetry collection last year and I didn't really understand it. I think it was good, but I don't really know. I think it might have been a bit too advanced for me. So I thought that maybe Lana Del Rey's poetry collection might be a little bit more accessible to me. I do like her music, and so I thought maybe I would understand this poetry collection a little bit more. And I will say that I did enjoy a lot of the poems. Some of them were really good, actually. But I still don't think I really understand poetry, like as a genre. I just don't get it. I think I might need to take a class in how to understand and appreciate poetry, because I don't know. So I did enjoy this, but I also don't think I fully connected to it. So I'm not going to give it a rating because I have no idea what I'm talking about when it comes to poetry. But if you're a Lana Del Rey fan, I think you'll enjoy it. And even if you don't listen to her music, I do think that the poems do have a certain vibe and feel. I feel very authentic, but in kind of an Americana and middle class sort of way, if that makes sense. Some of them feel a little bit more abstract in the themes, whereas others do feel much more personal and feel kind of like stream of conscious thoughts that she's just writing out on the page. So overall, I liked it pretty well. I think I need to figure out poetry a little bit more in the future though. The next book I read is called Antoinette's Sister by Diana Giovinazzo. So I really loved her debut novel called The Woman in Red. I read that one last summer. and I was really excited for this book, which came out in January. Fun fact, I actually won it in a Goodreads giveaway in December, and then my book just didn't arrive until February, so I got it a little bit later than I wanted to, but that's okay. I finally got to read it at the beginning of April. So, I think most of us know who Marie Antoinette is. She was the last queen of France in the 1700s. This book follows her sister, as the title says, who is only a few years older than her. Her name is Maria Carolina, or Charlotte, and she ended up becoming the queen of Naples and Sicily. This book really follows her life from childhood, when she and Marie Antoinette were still living at home in Austria, through her reign as queen of Naples and Sicily, and all the way to the end of her life. So I really enjoyed this book. I thought it was really fascinating and full of so much historical detail. I'm not an expert on the Habsburgs family, but I do remember being really interested in Marie Antoinette when I was younger. I read a few books about her, and I also remember playing a Nancy Drew game which had to do with Marie Antoinette. So it's been a while since I really looked into anything about Marie Antoinette, but I was really excited to read this one. And I really like getting to know her sister, who I knew absolutely nothing about before reading this. Charlotte is such a strong and intelligent and capable woman, and I really like seeing how she goes to Italy, and although she's young, she's only 15 when she gets there, she quickly comes into her own and really takes control of a country that is very corrupt and has a lot of issues. It's not long before she assesses the situation and sees who the bad actors are, and she really puts a lot of effort into gaining control, but also making the country a better place for the citizens. It talks about her interesting relationship with the King Ferdinand, who is rather immature, and also about her relationship with other people there. I really like reading about strong women, and Charlotte is definitely a strong and smart and hardworking woman, and it's really fascinating to read about her life. I really enjoyed the book up until about maybe 80% of the way through, 80 or 90%. Towards the end, I think it kind of petered out a little bit just because it did reach the end of her life, and that's when some issues came about. And I think to see the resolution to those issues, we really had to see her all the way until her death. That's just history. If this was pure fiction, I think I would have wanted the author to change how it ended a little bit. But because this is real life, there's not much you can do to change it without making it just completely inaccurate. But all in all, I really enjoyed this whole book. I thought it was just really fascinating and inspiring, and just a great opportunity to learn about someone I never knew about. So in the end, I gave this one 5 stars. The 4th book I read is called The No Show by Beth O'Leary. So this one is a bit of a complicated book. It follows 3 different women who have all been stood up by the same guy on Valentine's Day. But of course they don't know about each other. They don't know that he's also stood up these other women. But all 3 of them are stood up and eventually forgive him and continue pursuing a relationship with him. Throughout the book, we get chapters that follow each of the 3 different women, Siobhan, Miranda, and Jane, and the different kinds of conflicts that they're going through personally, and their different kinds of relationships that they're developing with this guy, Joseph Carter. So while you're reading this book, it does feel like Joseph Carter, although he seems likable on page, you know that there's got to be something going on, because, I mean, if he's stringing along these 3 different women, that's pretty bad, and he's not a really nice guy if that's what he's doing. Because of the format, it almost plays out like a kind of mystery or thriller, which I thought was really interesting, but it's also a very moving and emotional story that really goes into the categories of women's fiction and maybe romance as well. I don't want to say too much more than that because there are some interesting twists later on in the book, but I really thought it was nicely done. I think the first half of the book, I was having a hard time connecting with the characters though. I liked some of them more than others, but I really wasn't sure where it was going, and I think that made the pace feel a little bit slow at first. But the second half of the book was much better, and I really enjoyed that and found it very engrossing and interesting, and ultimately very emotional and deeply moving, honestly. This book does get into some themes of mental health for a few of the characters, which I thought was really nicely done, and I think that was one of my favorite things about the book. My other favorite thing about the book I really can't even talk about because there are spoilers around. I would say that this book is a slow burn, and if you're willing to get through that first 50%, which is kind of slower, the payoff is completely worth it. So I would say that the first half of the book felt like a 3-star read for me, but then the second half was definitely 5 stars. It was shocking and just so amazing and so stunning and so beautiful. So in the end, I give this book 4 stars. So after that, I read 2 Paris books, which I mentioned are in a different video, so I'll link to that in the description below. The 7th book I read is called The Mad Girls of New York by Maya Rodale. So this book is inspired by the real-life woman Nellie Bly, who was a reporter, a stunt reporter in the late 1800s in New York. I did know about her a little bit before reading this book. I had seen a movie about Nellie Bly a few years ago, And I thought it was really interesting, and I really loved the premise of that movie and how it followed her into a madhouse, which is something that she literally did in the 1800s as a sort of stunt to get a big story about the treatment of women in this asylum. So this book follows that exact same story. Nellie has just arrived in New York City after leaving her home in Pittsburgh, and now, after spending a few months in the city trying to get a job and being told no because she's a woman, she finally gets a gig doing a very bold stunt where she has to get herself committed to Blackwell's Island Insane Asylum, spend a week there, and then, upon her boss getting her out of the asylum, she will have a very big story exposing what is actually going on behind the walls of that asylum. Up to this point, the asylum has not given any interviews, has not allowed any journalists to go in, and famously, once women are committed to the asylum, they never get out, at least not alive. So this book is really fascinating, and I love how Nellie Bly has so much grit and ambition and determination, and it's really eye-opening and heartbreaking, honestly, to see how the women in this asylum are treated so horribly by the nurses. I wouldn't even really call them nurses and doctors. They behave more like prison guards, honestly. This book and Nellie Bly's research shows how easy it is to get committed to an asylum if you're a woman back then. Basically, if you're just inconvenient in some way, it was very easy for someone to lock you up there. And while you're in the asylum, the treatment is horrendous. So this book might not be for the faint of heart because it does show some horrific treatment of these women, but it is so fascinating, and also it's really inspiring to see someone who works so hard to not only get the story, but also to help the women in there, because the treatment is inhumane and there needs to be an end to it. I really enjoyed this book. It was a very quick and easy read and very engrossing. There's also a little bit of a hint of romance in it, not too much. I wouldn't classify it as a romance, and it's really just a hint. And this is the first in a series, so I'd expect to see more of that in upcoming books in the series. The Mad Girls of New York was a really great book, and I loved reading it. I gave it 4.5 stars. Also, if you want to learn more about Nellie Bly, I would definitely recommend reading her own book, starting with 10 Days in a Madhouse, which outlines this story. She has other books as well. There are also movie adaptations, which could be worth watching as well, like the one that I saw. It did have a low budget, evidently, but it was still an interesting movie, so I definitely recommend it. So after reading 2 more books that are set in Paris, which are in the other video, the 10th and final book I read is called The 30 Names of Night by Zain Shukadar. So in 2019, I had read his first book, The Map of Salt and Stars, and I really loved it. I thought it was beautifully written, and I was so excited when this book was coming out. It actually came out at the end of 2020, and I was planning to read it, and I don't know why I just didn't pick it up, but I really wanted to read it, and April was a perfect time because April was Arab American Heritage Month, and the author is Syrian American, so that works perfectly. This book follows an unnamed trans boy who's living in New York City. About 5 years ago, his mother died, and he's living with his grandmother and making sure that she's okay after surviving cancer. And the book follows as he is grappling with his gender identity and with how to come out to people, but also really trying to get at what his mother was researching before she died. She was an ornithologist, and he's trying to research this person that they both liked, who is named Layla Z, who is also an ornithologist and painter, and kind of get to the bottom of some unsolved mysteries around a certain bird which may or may not exist. Half the chapters follow his perspective, and the other half of the chapters do follow the other person, Layla Z, who grew up in Syria before coming to America in the early 1900s. This book is very beautiful and lyrical, and it really gets you inside the mind of someone who's grieving, but also who's grappling with their own mental health and with trying to understand the world around them through art and through birds. And it makes for a really magical feeling read, even though it's not technically a magical or fantasy book. I will admit that I often do struggle with literary fiction, which this one definitely is. It can just be hard to connect to for me, but I did find this one really moving and powerful and beautifully written. I really love the discussions around gender identity and sexuality between the different chapters, and I like seeing the connection that our narrator has with the people around him, his friends and his sister and his grandmother. It feels a little bit like magical realism. There's definitely something about it that feels just a little bit otherworldly, which I really liked. This book also goes all in with the birds, which I thought was really interesting. I don't really know much about birds, although I do love animals in general, so I found it fascinating to learn about. And in addition to the birds, I really liked getting to know the Syrian American identity and what it's like with combining those two cultures from Syria versus what you're expected to be like in America. So I really enjoyed the discussion around culture and religion, as well as gender identity and sexuality. This is a beautiful book, and I gave it 4 stars. So that wraps up everything I read in April. I read 10 books, which is actually more than I realized I'd read in the month. And overall, I really enjoyed all the books that I read. And remember that if you'd like to see the other 4 books I read for my Paris reading challenge, they're in the other video, which is linked in the description below. So I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, please like, comment, and subscribe. And to make sure you don't miss any more of my videos, please ring the bell to get all my notifications. I've put out about 2 to 3 videos each week, including vlogs, listicles, and wrap-ups, and more. So thanks for watching this video, and I hope to see you in the next one. Bye!